Get Rich Education is brought to you by Norada Real Estate, Mid-South Homebuyers, and Ridge Lending Group.
Welcome to Get Rich Education with Keith Weinhold, giving you information and ideas on the investment that has turned more ordinary people into millionaires and billionaires than anything else, and can provide you with more wealth and happiness than you ever thought possible. Now, here's your host, investor, entrepreneur, business owner, and educator, Keith Weinhold.
Welcome to Get Rich Education, episode 153. Hi, I'm your host, Keith Weinhold. What is the state of the real estate investment market today? That's our topic. And how do you best position yourself for these economic conditions? With listeners in 183 world nations, boy, that's getting pretty close to every world nation. Thanks for being here, but you're not here for me, you're here for you. First, let's talk about the tragedy in the Houston area, Hurricane Harvey. There's been such heartbreaking footage of fatalities and stories of survival of families dealing with the flooding there. You've probably seen the images of water levels so high that it's just a couple feet below an overhead street traffic signal and expressways that look like lakes and a lot of damage to people's homes and businesses. And you know, my mental frame of reference for this shoots back to the Hurricane Katrina flooding New Orleans in 2005. Well, back then, I still remember watching the footage on television and asking myself the question, how could this happen here? This doesn't even seem like something that could happen in the United States. Well, of course it could, because it did, and now it's happened again in Houston, and I really don't even ask myself that question anymore, as we've also seen devastation from other hurricanes like Rita and Sandy. After Katrina in New Orleans in 2005, I actually housed one displaced family of residents up in one of my apartment buildings in Anchorage, Alaska. So as Houston floodwaters recede, I think about a few things. I'm grateful that two friends that I have in the area, actually in Katy, Texas, it's Raj's family and Alan's family, that they're okay and accounted for. And you know something? Most Houston area residents don't have flood insurance. After a widespread tragedy like this, you're probably going to have residents suing insurance companies saying that they didn't provide them with adequate coverage. Just watch. That's, well, the type of thing that happens in the United States. Well, and here are some lessons for people that both own their primary residence in the Houston area or those that invest in real estate in Houston. It's really something that I've been talking about since this show began back in 2014, and that is that your great asset protection strategy is maintaining a high mortgage loan balance, meaning that you only have a little bit of equity in the property. If you only have a little equity, well, then your banker lender is more likely to hire your lawyer against the insurance company if such an ugly eventuality is necessary. That's because the lender is the one that has a lot of the skin in the game, not you. They're the one that has a lot of equity to protect you, and you don't. In fact, because of that, I would even contend that if you have a lender involved, you're more likely to have the insurance company just go ahead and pay your claim sooner. Now, conversely, if you had 100% equity in the property, meaning that there is no lender involved, and you had difficulty getting an insurer to pay a claim in the event of a hurricane or some other natural disaster, well, then you're more likely to have to hire the lawyer yourself in the event of having to go to battle with an insurance company. So not only is your financial return from equity always zero, like I often emphasize here, but more equity in a property increases your market risk in the event of a downturn. So if you've got, say, $100,000 in equity across your income properties, then having that equity spread across 3 or 4 or 5 different properties rather than having all $100K of your equity only sunk into one property, well, then that substantially limits your risk. It's just a good overall practice for you to have your property spread across multiple geographic markets. As you can see with the hurricane, it's not always just a question of the economic vibrancy of a market. It's not just the job growth or the in-migration and out-migration of a market. Outside events like this can happen, so hedge yourself, protect yourself. You can't stop a hurricane, but you are in some control here with how you distribute and manage your equity. That is the good news. That is the lesson. And you know, back in 2005, following Hurricane Katrina, it was soon announced that there was a moratorium on mortgage payments for those borrowers that were affected. So people with debt on the affected property, well, they're the ones that got the benefits. People without debt got no benefit, and that's often how it works. The borrower is the one that gets the benefit. So let's forget about disasters for a moment, okay? When a loan is made, who is in more control, the lender or the borrower? Who do you think it is? When any kind of loan is made, is the lender in a position of more control, or is it the borrower that's in a position of more control? It's the borrower. You don't believe me? Just make a loan to your uncle for $5,000, okay? Go ahead. He told you that he would pay you back in a full month, and then say that once that month is up, he still hasn't paid you back. So now, what are you, the family lender here, going to work out with your uncle, okay? See, you start to understand that the borrower is the one that's in control of a loan. You would probably work with him and let him make some sort of longer-term payment plan. You know, I want to be a borrower, not a lender. During the mortgage meltdown of 2008-2009, it was the borrower that got the benefit of the bank workouts and the short sales then as well. And I'm not encouraging you to be an irresponsible borrower. My message is simply that the borrower is in control of a loan, not the lender. And once again, that's going to prove true in Houston. That is your takeaway here. Be a borrower. Let someone else put their skin in the game. Maintain control yourself. And of course, as a borrower, you enjoy a cash flow while the loan is paid down for you by both inflation and it's paid down for you by your tenant. My thoughts are truly with those families affected by the devastating hurricane. It is truly a great American tragedy. Well, I'm in the Latin American nation of Belize today. I'm coming to you from Punta Gorda, Belize, and I'm spending a few days here learning about cacao tree harvesting. Yes, this is real estate investing. It is learning about investing in cash flowing agriculture, looking at cacao trees and their processing. Cacao is that base product for chocolate, and one of the best places in the world for growing this sort of fine flavored chocolate is right here on Belize's southern mainland. You've heard us talk about it on the show before, back in episode 125. It is fascinating. It is completely uncorrelated with U.S. residential real estate. It provides you with cash flow from the annual harvest of these cacao pods that grow on these trees. And most importantly, it's with the same group of people here that I've been investing with for more than 3 years, as the power of the team is so important here as it is everywhere. Because, shoot, I don't know how to be a farmer myself. You can learn more about it by reading a great report on this at greturnkey.com. Well, let's talk about the state of the real estate investment market today with our guest. Today's guest is an active real estate investor, a licensed realtor, certified coach, and she's also a former mortgage broker. She has a passion for researching and sharing the most important facts on real estate and economics, and you can tell it really comes out when you talk to her. She's a frequent guest expert where you've seen her on your television on CNN, CNBC, Fox News, NPR, and the Wall Street Journal. She also authored the book Retire Rich with Rentals. She hosts both Real Estate News and The Real Wealth Show, two great shows you can check out. Welcome back to Get Rich Education, Kathy Fettke.
Thank you so much for having me back.
Kathy, it's been more than a year and a half since you were last here with us. That was on episode 69. You and I are both longtime real estate investors, so tell us about the state of the real estate investment market today as you see it.
Well, it's really mixed out there. And, the bottom line is you can always find deals no matter what is happening in the market. Overall, we have kind of a split economy, really. We've got certain U.S. markets where housing is just booming. And if you've been flipping property, you've been making lots of money. Hopefully, if you've been in buy and hold, you've been seeing rental increases. So there's just a lot of differences between the areas. But one of the major concerns I'm sure everybody's seeing in headline news is lack of supply. And so in the areas where there's huge demand, or I should say job growth, population growth, but a lack of housing supply, well, you know what happens when there's more demand than supply, prices rise. So prices are rising, rents are rising, and there just doesn't seem to be an end in sight until there is one, and there will be. So that's another discussion.
We're kind of in the opposite place that we were 10 years ago, when 10 years ago we were generally in an overbuilt condition, and now we have just your economics 101 of demand supply, demand far outstripping supply, and that causes a few problems and ripples through the economy. You know, one of them are concerns for affordability for people.
Absolutely. And so generally what happens in a normal market cycle, you go through these phases and they're pretty predictable for the most part. So usually when you have a recession, people losing jobs, and then suddenly there's more foreclosures, and then there's more distressed inventory on the market, and prices drop, and the affordability is out of whack. And so you start to see a slowdown and a drop in prices, and that can be severe or, kind of a gentle drop. But of course, the last time it was quite severe. Then there's a recovery phase where at one point, people start to wake up and say, oh my goodness, prices are so low now, we need to jump in and buy inventory. Most people are scared at that time because they don't know when the lowering of prices will end. So a lot of people, or they just, people have lost their jobs and they've got poor credit or for whatever reason, there tends to be a lot of inventory at the bottom with very few people buying it, even when maybe just a few years before everybody was racing in to buy it at much higher prices. So it's just a very shocking change, but normal in more market cycles. So then when people start buying at the bottom, well, then the smart investors, that's when they come in, buy properties for cheap, and then they buy all the cheap stuff. So then people think prices are rising, but really it's just a matter that all the distressed inventory was sold. And because headline news says, oh, wow, prices are rising, then more people jump in because they're not as afraid of prices going down. They're going up. And then they go up quickly from there because of the media jumping in. And it's at that point that it makes sense for builders to come back, because now they can build inventory in a market where prices are rising. They'd rather do that than in a market where prices are falling. Now builders coming back, and it takes a while for them to get up and going. And by the time they do, many cases, it's when prices have already run up to the top. And so that's oftentimes where builders get it wrong, is their inventory comes online at the peak, right? The next recession is due because of the same factors we mentioned earlier, lack of affordability and so forth. So all of these phases are normal. But like you said, what's different this time around is that it's just getting harder for builders to get that inventory up and running, and they're building the wrong stuff. They're bringing in housing that is very expensive. A lot of downtown condos, high-rise condos, very, very expensive in San Francisco, New York, Miami, even Chicago. But that's not necessarily what people are wanting. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out.
Yeah, Kathy, I wonder if people just need to get more used to paying more for housing over time. In the United States and Canada, it's kind of commonly accepted that one's housing cost should be 30% or less of their income. That's deemed affordable. But back in the 1950s in Canada, it was 20%, and they raised it up to 25%. And then in the 1980s, they replaced that with a 30% rule. So, when it comes to affordability, I think the reason it gets more difficult is it's not just population growth, but it's actually what that population is doing. Well, people are living longer, so now people need to be longer. That's more demand for housing right there. And, we have a smaller family size now. We have more single people. So instead of 2 people in one dwelling, now you might have 2 people in 2 dwellings. And lifestyle choices like that, that's something that sort of drives demand up and drives affordability down over the longer term.
Sure, and I think that's the case. I mean, I was born and raised in an area that's typically unaffordable, the San Francisco Bay Area. It's never been cheap, and it's really more of an honor to be a homeowner than a normal thing, because, the only way most people can own a home in the San Francisco Bay Area if they're young is if they get help from their family, or if they just have a really high-paying job or been able to save a lot of money. I just grew up not expecting to own a home so easily. But with that said, life is changing, and that's one thing we can really predict, is that nothing is going to be the same in the next 3 years, 5 years, 10 years. It's changing dramatically, and technology is at the hub of that. So it's my sense that people will choose lifestyle over expenses. And if it really costs most of their paycheck to live somewhere, there's a good chance they'll move somewhere else. That's what I'm seeing, at least with the millennials. I mean, right now, a lot of millennials are young. They're out of college. They're just getting started in life. And in college, they were used to sharing rooms. And I just dropped my daughter off at San Diego State, and she's sharing a tiny room with another person, and they're sharing a bathroom with two other people. And that's 4 girls sharing one toilet and one shower. So we'll see how that goes. So they're kind of used to that lifestyle. But as they grow up, they're not going to want the dorm life so much. And will they want to stay in the high-priced areas? And maybe in 5 to 10 years, they won't need to. With all the technological changes coming, it could be that more people are able to work from home and live in more remote places. I mean, again, one thing we can agree on is everything is changing. And so demand might as well, because the truth is only about 30 to 40% of the country, geographically speaking, is overpriced. You still have about 60% of the country that's very affordable, very, very affordable. I can still go to parts of the country that, I can buy a house for $60,000. You don't need much. If you're getting an FHA loan, 3% of that, we're talking under $2,000 to be able to put a down payment on a home, and your payment's going to be $300 a month or something, if at most. And whereas renting that place is going to be more like $600, $700, maybe even $900. So I do believe the millennial population is going to choose lifestyle, and they already are. They don't want to be slaves to their jobs and slaves to the quote unquote man for their whole lives. They're going to live differently. One example is our own employee, Maggie Pike. She's been working for us, and she got out of college, and she's just not ready to settle down. She works for a real estate company, and I've been trying to get her to buy real estate since she started working for us, and she hasn't yet. And you know what she's doing instead? She's living an amazing life. She has decided to live in a different country every month. So she has no home right now. She's actually homeless, but she works for me, a company helping people buy homes. And instead, they Airbnb. Her workflow has been the same. Nothing's changed. She still works for Rural Health Network and does everything she used to do. But one day she's in Argentina, and the next month she's in Brazil, and the next month she's in China. She is wherever she is. And that lifestyle that is so exotic is actually cheaper than if she were to live in the San Francisco Bay Area.
Yeah, when she's got her mobility, she's got her flexibility. Someone like Maggie working for you, and you and I have similar mindsets, Kathy. It's kind of, you should rent, quote unquote, what you're supposed to own and buy what you can rent to others, especially when you're living in one of those coastal volatile markets.
Right. And so this year, finally, she's on her almost 10-year anniversary with us, and she is actually buying her first investment property, and we're so proud of her and so happy she's doing that. But, it's very typical for this millennial age. She's not going to be living in that.
It's the old live where you want to live and invest where the numbers make sense mantra.
Yeah.
But, Kathy, when we talk about affordability, we're talking about housing prices, and we're talking about wages and how they're moving relative to each other. Now, numbers are always so manipulated, but Case-Shiller came out with their recent year-over-year numbers, and it shows that housing in the United States has increased at a rate of 5.7% in its 20-city index, and that's certainly an imperfect measure, and there aren't actually that many of those markets in Case-Shiller's 20-city index where you do kind of have those cities where you have favorable proportions of rent income to purchase price where it makes sense for cash flowing investors. But that's what we got, 5.7% year over year. And that feels sustainable because that is pretty close to the about 6% rate of appreciation, just nationally and historically, very broad. You can poke a lot of holes in it when you want to parse it a lot of different ways. But that 5.7% gain, it doesn't only feel sustainable, it's actually underlaid with fairly responsible lending practices, something that we didn't have 10 years ago.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, the rapid appreciation that we've seen in so many markets has slowed down for the most part. If you talk to somebody who just made a fortune over the past 8 years and you're new to real estate and think, I want to do that, I want to buy a property in, I don't know, let's say Portland or Seattle where, prices have just taken off, or Denver, And you think, boy, I could buy something there and double my money like so-and-so did. Well, you're probably not going to be able to do that overnight. You'll probably double your money, but it's going to take a longer. And that's a risk anyway, hoping that that's the case. And there's certainly not cash flow in those areas anymore. Like I said earlier, I really do believe that everything cycles. It goes through a pattern. And right now, we're at that kind of typical place in the market cycle where everybody thinks everything's going to be okay forever, because it has been for a while. We kind of are creatures of habit. So a lot of people who jumped into the market this decade think they can't lose. And they're making bets that just they shouldn't be. Low cap rates. A lot of people buying multifamily at low cap rates thinking that they can fix up those properties and sell it for an even lower cap rate. And that's just really unlikely, really unlikely. What's more likely is that we're going to see more inventory come online at some point, and there'll be something that triggers that. We don't quite know what that is, but it will be something. Of the factors that are out there, well, we have an aging baby boomer population, and they're not really dying off yet. I mean, I'm one of them, so we want to stay young forever. But our parents are. So a lot of baby boomers will be inheriting property soon, and some will hold, some will sell, but that will contribute to inventory in the years ahead. And also, we've got more inventory coming online with builders building apartments, and they're not bringing them on fast enough, but there is inventory coming online, and that will add to supply. And so I just always caution people, the way things are is not the way they'll be. What you need to do, especially at this phase in the cycle, in my opinion, is be extremely cautious. And every decision you make needs to be one that could sustain a downturn if there was one. The most likely chance of a downturn would be if there was quantitative tightening. We've had quantitative easing for, since the Great Recession, and that was the way we pulled ourselves out. The Federal Reserve just printed a bunch of money and threw it into the economy, and we called that an economic boom, and we're talking trillions of dollars. Well, now the Fed is reversing that and tightening and raising interest rates and balancing their balance sheet. And so that means that that's a tightening. And whenever the Fed tightens, that automatically, the reason they do that is to slow the economy. So that's happening, and people need to be aware that when they see the Fed raising rates, basically the media says, oh boy, they're doing this because the economy's booming. And maybe that's true. But the part they're not saying is the raising the interest rates is meant to slow down that boom. So just, again, be aware, because historically, what comes right after rate hikes is a recession. So just be cautious. Just be cautious. If you're going to do a flip, do one that you can do quickly, and where you wouldn't lose money if prices softened about 10% or whatever. If you're going to buy an apartment, then, just calculate the possibility of rents decreasing. Calculate both. Sure, maybe they'll continue to rise, but what if they don't? Will you be okay? Do a best case and worst case scenario, and if everything still pencils, then you've got a winner. But otherwise, just be careful.
I think what you say makes a lot of sense. And we all of us, me included, have this psychological predisposition toward this recency bias being you think things are going to continue to be the way they are just because they've been that way for so long. Mm-hmm. No one knows the future. I don't know the future for sure. I'm sure not making any firm prediction, but, I would guess that appreciation rates are going to be challenged in coming years, and things just aren't going to continue to appreciate on a national level at 5.7%, like the latest Case-Shiller data shows. You're listening to Get Rich Education. Our guest is the Real Wealth Network's Kathy Fettke. More when we come back. I'm your host, Keith Weinhold.
Are you looking for a roadmap to financial freedom? If so, we have a solution for you. Norada Real Estate is offering a limited number of free strategy sessions to help you get out of the rat race. Learn how you can create wealth and build monthly passive income. To set up a time with one of our knowledgeable investment counselors, simply go to noradarealestate.com. That's NORADA realestate.com.
Cash flow real estate investors, if you're looking for a mortgage loan with a company that specializes in investment property loans, it's Ridge Lending Group. They provide income property loans in almost every U.S. state. Ridge has worked with tens of thousands of investors and homeowners all over the country. In fact, with ethics and transparency, they've helped more people realize their dreams through real estate investing than any other mortgage lender in the country. Get started at ridgelendinggroup.com.
This is Rich Dad, Poor Dad author Robert Kiyosaki. Listen to Get Rich Education with Keith Weinhold. And the reason I respect Keith, he's a very strong, smart, bright young man.
Welcome back to Get Rich Education with our guest, Kathy Fettke from the Real Wealth Network, realwealthnetwork.com. So, Kathy, you were last here with me in February of 2016. I'd just like to hold ourselves accountable. What we were talking about then is then at that point, we had only experienced 1/4 point Fed rate hike. We had even talked about the possibility that the Fed is just doing that as a confidence play, and they might actually have to reverse course and even potentially go into some quantitative easing again, which means printing money. But now they've raised the interest rate 3 more times by 1/4 point each time since you were last year on the show with me, and they're actually talking about doing quantitative tightening, which would be constricting the money supply. We've had a lot of things happen, though, since February of 2016, including a presidential election result that really surprised a lot of people. So what do you think's changed with regard to monetary policy and interest rate sensitivity since you were last here?
Such a good question. And I'm really quite an optimist normally. So when I come around with this doomsday news, it's not natural for me and I don't like it. It's just that, when I got hit hard in 2009, I had to become less of an optimist when it comes to real estate and be cautious, again, which is not my nature, but I don't want to ever have to go through what I went through in 2009. What you and I were talking about was the truth back then. We were dealing with an economy and a government that has been very manipulative. That's just the bottom line. What's been happening has never happened before. So to predict it would be nearly impossible because no one would think that any government would do such a thing as we've done, which is to print so much money. It's unprecedented. Japan has had massive quantitative easing. So they've been sort of testing it out. It hasn't worked for their economy, but the U.S. tested it out and kind of worked. It seems that all that money stimulated the economy enough that now we're raising rates and it seems to be okay right now.
Right. As irresponsible as it might sound, it's almost like, well, so far so good. We're hanging in there.
Yeah, we're teetering, on something, on a big pile of I don't know what, but it is, it is what happened was, again, so shocking. And that was that a real estate tycoon ran for president. Many thought as a joke, maybe just for his own marketing purposes. I mean, at the time, nobody thought he would win. There were a lot of contestants, many experienced politicians on that stage with him. Nobody, not very many people, let's say, saw this coming. And I think what was even more shocking was the vein that he hit, basically, which was, we want change. We want big change. And we want all the things that he's preaching. We want this businessman to run this country like a business and stop just giving out handouts and this and that. And, don't tax the workers, the people that have been contributing. Don't tax them to death. Don't kill the goose. And so he gained so much support for his concepts, at least to get him into office. And that really woke up a lot of people to believe that things were going to change and that perhaps the economy would boom even more by taxing people less and deregulating. And of course, all the things that he suggested. Now, fast forward, not very far ahead. I mean, he's only been in office for a few months and he sure gets a lot of pressure and a lot of criticism for not really having had much of a chance to implement. But the fact of the matter is these promises haven't really come through yet. And it's not easy when you're not the boss and can tell people what to do, when you actually have to work with other people and get them to agree with you. We're not there yet. Again, a lot of people just didn't expect that there would be such a response to his election and that from that response, people would feel so confident and pour money into what seemed to be a stock market that didn't make sense. Just a lot of people have been scratching their heads going, what's happening here? I don't understand it. Is it just this optimism where's this money coming from? How is the stock market at all-time highs when nothing really technically has changed yet? It's just a lot of good ideas.
Yeah.
Or what at least Republicans would say would be good ideas. Anyway, that's where we are. And in my opinion, if Trump is not successful in getting his campaign promises into fruition, then we could see a turnaround. We could see disappointment. We could see the money coming back out of the inflated stock market, and that certainly would affect a lot of things and eventually trickle down to housing. There's so many unknowns. And even if President Trump succeeds, and even if we create massive jobs and growth in this country and wage increases and all the things that people want, there's still a huge problem that he can't fix. Not yet. We haven't figured out how. And that is the massive debt problem we have and the massive, massive issue of pensions and entitlements. We've got this aging population of baby boomers and their parents, and they're ready to cash in, and the money's just not there. You've got entire states like Illinois that cannot pay their pensions. What happens when people who've worked their whole life suddenly have nothing that they thought they'd have? What do? Where's the money come from? These are things that people just don't want to talk about or pay attention to because there is no answer for it.
Yeah, and the Trump victory, that really caught just about everybody off guard. Major world economists, including a prominent one that's appeared here on the show with me twice. He wrote and published a book right before Donald Trump's election, and I don't think the timing of the release of that book was right, because there are a lot of things in there that he and a lot of other economists had to reverse course on. So, really the same goes for all of us spectators here, that I think we're all pretty surprised last November. A lot of this has to do with interest rates and the policy that the Fed makes in conjunction with whom has been elected president. And we're so interest rate sensitive here as real estate investors because, as Robert Kiyosaki likes to say, savers are losers, debtors are winners. And a lot of our wealth is tied to debt and prudently leveraged debt over time. One thing I was talking about on the last episode of the show here, Kathy, is that especially in the event of a potential downturn, that apartment building investors can be more exposed to interest rate risk than single-family homeowners can. That's really for the main reason that oftentimes 5+ unit apartment building investors tie up at a fixed interest rate for 5 to 10 years. Well, if your interest rate resets in 5 years, that's going to put a lot of pressure on you when it comes time for you to sell, or if you try to refinance and the interest rate resets to something higher. If you have a takeout buyer that tries to come in, they're not going to be able to pay as much for it because they're looking for arbitrage and they'll have to pay a higher interest rate now. So in a lot of cases, 30-year fixed rate mortgage holders of those 1 to 4 unit properties could potentially be in better shape and hedge themselves against a potential downturn. What are your thoughts there, apartment building investor versus the single family income property investor?
Well, if you have never been eaten alive by debt, then you don't have any reason to fear it. I did get in a short-term loan with my husband, and I'm the one who talked him into getting it in his name, in his credit. And when that loan ballooned and there was no financing for us to refi, there was nothing in 2008. It didn't matter how good your credit was. It didn't matter what a good investor you were. There was just no money. And so we had 2 balloon notes and no way to get the money we needed. And we had to hand those properties back to the bank. We lost a lot of money and Rich's credit was destroyed. And I felt terrible guilt for that. So until you have been through it, boy, you don't really know the pain it can cause. It just so happens I'm married to an incredible man who just doesn't care that much about these things. He cares about our marriage. And so he never, ever for 1 minute made me feel bad about that. But I got to say, I'll never do it again. I'm cautious about short-term loans. I don't care if it's on an apartment. We have a lender that works on portfolio loans. They can put a blanket loan on all your single families, and it does reset in 5 years. And that, I just warn people, hey, it's cool. You can get that money now, but you better have a plan in 5 years. So maybe only put it on half your portfolio so that worst case scenario, you've got some properties free and clear that you could sell to pay off that note or something. There just has to be a backup plan when it comes to short-term loans, because you should never expect that money will be there in 5 years because you just don't know. And it sounds hard to believe today when it's fairly easy to get financing, not as easy as it was, but money's out there again. So it's hard to believe that maybe there would be a time when it wouldn't be. Maybe I'm wrong and everything will be hunky-dory forever from here on out and we'll never have another recession. But if it's just remember, 2008 wasn't that long ago. And the reason why I'm successful today is because so many other investors lost everything. I'm not saying that proudly. we picked up properties that other people lost because of the loans that they were in.
Yeah, some great lessons to learn from that experience there. And so it's not just product type, whether it's apartment buildings or single-family homes, but it is also those places. So where do you think a good place geographically is for investors to be today?
I know I sound so paranoid, but I used to sit with my dad and he would tell me these things. I say, Dad, you're too paranoid. But, he had been through life, and so I feel I'm weathered now. And so with that said, back to markets. I'm still a believer in single-family homes simply because it's the American dream still. And still, the greatest wealth has been built from just owning a home. When you look at the stats today, the people who are the haves, the people who have something, some net worth of any kind, are the people who own homes. And that is because they, instead of renting, put their rent towards owning a home and have built that equity. And when you can multiply that by having several, having a home maybe you live in that you either rent or own, but having other homes that other people live in and they're paying your mortgage off, not a short-term balloon note, but a long-term fixed-rate mortgage, well, over time, that property gets paid off. So in answer to your question, areas where you can cash flow on the property, so you're not negative cash flow, and where it makes sense, where home prices are in line with salaries and the average income of that area. So you look at when I would say add on to that manufacturing jobs that from factories that are not going to disappear overnight because there are certain things that robots can't replace. We are really very bullish on markets. Well, let me give you one that a lot of people don't talk about that much, but we are building homes in Reno, Nevada. And it's not a great cash flow market. We're actually building there because there's such demand. But the jobs that are going there are the jobs of the future. So they're not going to disappear, not quickly anyway. You've got the Tesla factory moving there. You've got Google, Amazon, Facebook. They're 3.5 hours away from the Silicon Valley, but it's a no state income tax state. And it's still the average home price is still well below the San Francisco Bay Area. So we are very bullish on Reno. The approach we're taking is building homes. We have, I think it's 270 lots there that we'll be building single-family homes. We partnered with a builder and have our investment group at Real Wealth Network investing and partnering with him. And he's giving them a 15% preferred, so nice return, and that's all secured to the land. That's one thing we like. Another place where it's super cheap and a different approach it's more buy and hold is Cleveland, Ohio. And that's simply because there are jobs there that, again, I don't believe will be going away. It's a huge medical community, and you have an aging population here in the U.S. So when you've got cutting-edge medical in the Cleveland area with the Cleveland Clinic, and gosh, it's practically a whole city there is medical. You've got like 3 universities, it may be more, right in the surrounding area. So you can rent to nurses and doctors and people in the medical profession. A lot of millennials moving to that city. There's actually really nice restaurants. It's been revitalized. They're revitalizing the lake. So there's just a lot of features we like. And home prices still so low, less than $100,000. And although prices are going up rapidly, but you can cash flow. And I believe those jobs would be able to sustain any kind of recession.
Yeah, and fairly favorable landlord-tenant laws in Ohio, like you often get in those Midwestern markets. And then in Reno, you're just far enough east to kind of get out of the California landlord-tenant laws, which sure don't help investors. But Reno, that's a lot of places that people aren't talking about very much. What about a place where people have really for quite a few years talked about investing in cash flowing real estate? And that's Texas. What are your thoughts about Texas today? 10 years ago, it seemed like there was a greater, real estate investing arbitrage that you were exploiting in Texas than you are today. I still like Texas. It still works. It just doesn't work for the cash flow component as much as it used to. It seems like years ago, you had a lot of money beginning to flow from your home state of California, Kathy, into Texas. So what do you think about the state of the Texas real estate investment market today?
Well, first and foremost, my heart just goes out to the families who are suffering today.
Oh,
there's obviously a huge tragedy in the Houston area. So from an investor perspective, I actually see this as with the number of homes that are now no longer usable, there is going to be tremendous demand. If you asked me last week what I thought about Texas, I would say, we still have teams there and we still help investors buy there. The cash flow is not as good and there's probably not appreciation, but I have a different story today. I was very much involved during Katrina and there were tax benefits for going in and helping rebuild that area. And I think that's going to be the case for Texas as well. So we're staying really in tune with what's going on there. And I do believe investors will be able to benefit by helping people who are going to desperately need housing. Now, when it happened with Katrina, we had a lot of properties in Dallas. And what happened is many of the victims were moved to just different areas. And so we had tremendous demand for housing, even though the storm hadn't been anywhere near Dallas, but Dallas home prices and rents just soared as a result of demand for housing. So I actually think that's going to be the case. And if you own property in Texas, you're probably going to see even stronger demand than you had before. And I do believe there's going to be an oil comeback as well as soon as next year, because just like housing, when there was a housing crisis, builders stopped building, and then there was a lack of housing. Well, it's the same in the oil industry where rigs just stopped producing and now they're rusty and old, but we're using oil. And so I think there's going to actually be a shortage of oil. So I actually am back to being bullish on Texas. And I hope that as investors, we can come together and help the people in Houston area rebuild.
That surely is a great American tragedy, what happened a few weeks ago there. I've given. I hope that you can give if you have the ability to. Well, Kathy, any final thoughts that you have on the state of real estate investing today, where an investor should be, what they ought to know, what they ought to be careful for, anything?
Yes, I would say, just again, if you're new to investing, good for you. You're welcome aboard. You are needed. There is tremendous demand for landlords right now. We do believe that there's going to be a continuing drop in homeownership over the next 10 years because from the reports that we have, and I hope I'm wrong, I really do, but from what I've read, only about 3% of today's renters can actually afford a home. They don't have the down payment. They have high debt. They just don't have savings and wages aren't increasing. So with all of those stats, I mean, housing has been moving, but it's mostly investors and foreigners. The foreign investment was up, I don't know, something like 48% this year. But the average American renter, they're not in a great position to own. That leaves an opportunity for investors to either be landlords or to do seller financing. So again, if you're new, welcome. We need you. We need people to provide housing, but you got to know what you're doing. Don't jump in and just think, oh, this looks easy. I live in a home. I know how to do this. You need to learn, and you need to make sure that you have some kind of mentor, somebody who has done what you want to do and is going to help you. Don't think that if you just use a real estate agent who doesn't actually own property that they're going to be able to give you great advice.
Well, Kathy, you've really been a long-time respected authority delivering a lot of valuable housing and real estate investing information. To those listeners I have that are less familiar with you, what's a great way for them to get to know you better?
Oh, wonderful. Yeah, you can go to Real Wealth Network, realwealthnetwork.com. That's our website. You could join for free and get access to lots of training, lots of information. Our actual training is $10 a month. We keep it really affordable so that anyone can do it. And we donate all that money, all $10 to the charities listed on our website because it's not a profit center for us. We just want people to learn and we want to give that money to those who need it. So realwealthnetwork.com. You can also get my book on Amazon, Retire Rich with Rentals. That's a really, really, really simple step-by-step process of how to get into the rental business. And then my podcast, The Real Wealth Show and Real Estate News for Investors.
Kathy Fettke, it's been great having you back.
Thanks for having me.
Kathy and I are two people that have invested through the national real estate downturn 10 years ago. So we're probably more averse to interest rate risk on short-term loans, 30-year fixed-rate mortgages, or where I like to be. If you think that that's conservative, well, maybe it is, but I think that it's a better place to be. I think we both had an imprint left on the amygdala portion of our brains. Yes, that's that part of your brain devoted to memory and even emotion. That happened to us coming out of 2009. I think that real estate will keep appreciating for a while here, but at a rate that's probably slower than it's been these last few years. And you've got to remember, too, when you see prices go up, sometimes it's due to inflation and sometimes it's appreciation. Trump's surprise election made a lot of economists do almost complete 180s on a lot of their predictions. Almost no one saw that coming. Being a real estate president, Trump is going to afford us real estate investors some protections. You know, sometimes in years past, you would hear about the mortgage interest deduction being threatened. You heard that it might be completely taken away. Well, whether you like our president or not, that is going to be preserved with him. as president. I actually think the mortgage interest deduction would be preserved over the long term, even if he weren't president. Governments want to support home ownership, and the mortgage interest deduction benefits a lot of owner-occupants as well there in their primary residence. Now, with the 1031 tax-deferred exchange, now that's a tool for real estate investors, not primary residence owners. And sometimes in years past, you would see some Congress people in the past criticize 1031s as a tax break for the wealthy. Well, even your 1031 is something that I feel is going to be preserved as long as a real estate guy like this is in the White House. Well, coming up in future weeks, we've got some interesting shows. We're going to talk to Ridge Lending Group founder Chaley Ridge and find out what the latest is in the mortgage loan climate today, because again, you want to be a borrower. You want to maintain control. The borrower is in control of a loan, not the lender. So we're going to talk about down payments, FICO scores, reserves, interest rates, and all of those things with Chaley. And then down the road on a later episode here, we're going to talk to the youngest guest that we've ever had here on Get Rich Education when we talk with a 22-year-old freshly minted college graduate. Instead of going off and getting a regular workaday job like his college grad friends have, he's begun investing in real estate instead. He's going to tell us if he feels jealous because his friends are making more money than him right off the bat than he is while he's slowly building something for himself. Well, as far as actionable guidance for you, where do you find the right properties that are newly renovated in job growth submarkets with experienced property management? You can find that by downloading an investor report or 2 or 5 and connecting with the provider at greturnkey.com. And there have just never been more resources there than there are right now, including the newly added markets in St. Louis and Kansas City, like we discussed last week. That is the one central place where you can take the kind of action that's going to result in a positive change in your life there at greturnkey.com. I hope that I've added value to your life and to your investing mindset this week. Signing off from tropical Punta Gorda, Belize. I'll be back next week to help you build your wealth. Don't quit your daydream.
You've been listening to Get Rich Education, telling you what the wealthy won't tell you about real estate and investing.
Nothing on this show should be considered specific, personal, or professional advice. Please consult an appropriate tax, legal, real estate, financial, or business professional for individualized advice. Opinions of guests are their own. Information is not guaranteed. All investment strategies have the potential for profit or loss. The host is operating on behalf of Get Rich Education, LLC exclusively.
The preceding program was brought to you by your home for wealth building, GetRichEducation.com.